Hello and welcome back to this series where I am making a wheelchair-friendly raincoat in a disability-friendly way. That is, by only sewing in small chunks of 20 minutes a day to avoid pain and fatigue. So now we are up to day 4, or more like session 4, and my microphone ran out of battery, so it's all voiceover for this day. After the previous session where I'd batched my sewing together for energy efficiency, I had all the hem facing pieces joined together and ready to sew to their corresponding lining pieces. It's very common on a coat or a jacket to have these facing pieces in the main fabric, acting as a border around the edges of the lining. This help gives shape to the garment, but it also means that we won't see any of the lining fabric poking out from inside the cape when it's worn. So for this day, I was starting at step 10 in the instructions, easing in the back lining piece to the back hem facing. The next few steps, 11 and 12, also involved easing in the curved hem facings of the fronts and sleeves to their corresponding lining pieces, so I knew I was going to be in for a lot of curves in this session. I started with the back as this was the biggest piece, matching the centre back seam and then the balance marks either side of the centre back. You can see the amount of ease I'm having to deal with just in this tiny little section between the centre back and the balance marks either side of it. The particularly curvy section at the side seam was especially difficult to line up, so I started at that end and worked my way in to be sure the side seams would match. I then tried to approximately find the middle of each of the pieces. I was frustrated on a number of occasions with the lack of balance marks on this pattern. I don't know if this is just because I don't use this sort of digital sewing pattern very often, or because I'm used to vintage patterns, but to ease in these really long curved pieces to each other with a total of 2 balance marks at either end really isn't enough in my opinion. Once I had found the rough midpoints on each of these curves, I could match them to each other, and hopefully that meant my ease would be evenly distributed and not all bunched up at one end. I could then work on smoothing the areas between the clips into each other as best I could. For my main fabric, I'm using oilcloth, which is waterproof, and so I couldn't use pins as the holes the pins leave behind could let water in when I wear it. But oilcloth is very stiff and structured, unlike my lining fabric, which was this checked brush cotton or flannel. It's very loosely woven, and where the curves of this hem are cut on the bias, which is prone to stretching and warping, I had to take extra care to make sure I wasn't making what was already a very difficult job even trickier. With something like this, there is no point rushing it. You have to take your time and do all this prep work properly if you want to have a hope of getting it through the sewing machine without everything moving and getting caught up. This process did get quicker as I started to get a feel for things, but even though I knew it would be fiddly, it was much longer than I expected. I repeated all these steps for the other half of the back, but that one pattern piece on its own took 8.5 minutes just to clip together. And in a 20-minute sewing session, that really doesn't feel like you've made any progress. I didn't take that piece up to the sewing machine straight away as I wanted to clip the other curves into place so I could batch sew them all in one go. Due to lack of space, my sewing machine has to live upstairs, but as mentioned in the last video, stairs are not my friend, and so I try to avoid unnecessary trips if I can. That meant that I moved onto the front hem facings next. This process was almost exactly the same, but this time there were 2 separate pieces. The shapes and angles that had to be eased into each other were almost identical to the back, which meant this was a touch faster now I knew what I was doing. I started with the balance marks, matching them and clipping them in place, and then the centre front edge where the button opening would eventually be. Then I found the midpoints between the centre front and the side seams and matched those, and then I found that the best way to naturally see how the fabrics wanted to lie against each other was to sort of rub them together between my fingers. This flannel fabric naturally wants to grip onto surfaces, and I could use that to my advantage when easing the curves into each other. Particularly useful when you can't use pins. It meant I could clip them in a way that was working with what the fabric wanted to do instead of fighting it. With both fronts clipped together and ready to be sewn, I made a start on the sleeves. As the curve around the hem of the sleeve was a lot less extreme, it was a lot easier to work with. But all the same steps applied, matching the centre seam, balance marks, edges, and then smush the in-between sections. I was just about to start on the second sleeve when the timer went off. I could have carried on with the second sleeve, but instead I just set myself up for the next session by matching the centre seams and clipping it into place so I didn't have to waste time looking for the correct pattern piece next time. This was another frustrating sort of sewing session. To abandon this sleeve facing for next time took all my willpower. I'm sure it was the right thing to do, but it's so annoying to not get a satisfying ending. Anyway, you'll have to wait until the next video for your own satisfaction too. Thanks for watching. See you next time.